The battle at the Department of Mysteries feels just as intense behind the scenes as with the incredible CGI in the final cut. Whether it was enhancing flames during the Battle at the Weasleys or adding magical effects to the Battle of Hogwarts, the Harry Potter team did it all.
Because we are the high-tech multi-million-dollar production that we are, the Snake's double was a pole with a boxing glove tied to the end.
In the Goblet of Fire, we get one of the most intense battles as Harry and Voldemort face off at the end of the Triwizard Tournament. But behind the scenes, the battle looked pretty different. Of course, lights and effects were added to show the casting of spells in their duel, but editing also had to be done on Ralph Fiennes' face to give him the snake-like appearance of Voldemort. Harry's parents make their appearance as well, but while filming, Radcliffe didn't actually have their support behind him. The two actors filmed their parts at a different time and in a completely different space. After the fact, the editors managed to tie it all together flawlessly.
Accio!
This emotional battle was just as intense while filming as the completed fight in the final cut. We can totally believe they were dodging spells and trying to claim a victory without seeing the lights of spells being cast. The tension in the room, especially as Bellatrix takes Sirius out, is very evident.
I kept on doing like ping pong sounds.
During the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort and Harry make their way throughout the castle, battling in any room they can find. This epic staircase duel was no different. While behind the scenes they were really on rubble-covered steps, the rest of the scene looked much less violent and magical without the CGI. Their acting energy was high, and the Harry Potter and Voldemort actors waved their arms, dueling for their lives. In the end, as the two go head-to-head for the last time, we see an emotional but much calmer scene than in the movie, and of course, Ralph Fiennes doesn't dissolve into the air after his defeat. The battle in the Astronomy Tower is quiet and still without the CGI. The mood on the set while filming was quite similar. Behind the scenes looks just as dark as we feel seeing the final cut of this heartbreaking moment and the loss of Dumbledore with the smallest spell from Snape.
Yes, I'm the Half-Blood Prince.
The major Battle of Hogwarts in the final film was just as chaotic behind the scenes. Instead of CGI people, huge crowds of actors were on the set amid the rubble, while camera people ran backwards through them, capturing all the action. The Dumbledore and Potter duo facing off with Voldemort is filled with fire on screen, but without the special effects, it looks like a bit of a different story. Of course, we couldn't get a real fiery Nagini or construct the entire Ministry set, so CGI filled in all the details. Hogwarts was in a seriously desperate state while under attack, from the fiery Quidditch Stadium to the countless spells being cast, none of which we see in the unedited footage. CGI was key to amplify the gruesome scene as more enemies stormed the castle. Neville's fall was also made a reality thanks to some excellent editing of the shots captured on set.
That went well.
What could be better than one Potter? The 7 Potters battling and racing away to get Harry and themselves into the wizarding world safely involved a ton of CGI, especially when it came to the speedy motorcycle chase with Hagrid.
Harry, no!
CGI was important to amplify all the flames and environment for the wicked battle at the Weasleys, but surprisingly, behind the scenes was nearly as flame-filled. The space did have actual haze surrounding them alongside a few fires to perform with, but the vast field was in fact a blue screen on set.
But there's one condition. You must obey every command I give you without question.
Dumbledore facing the cave infested with Inferi is dark and terrifying. And behind the scenes on a partially constructed set, Michael Gambon brought the intensity acting pretty well on his own. The film crew included real fires and moving lights to help create the right effects. Underwater filming was extremely intense even without all the added effects. To help depict Radcliffe's struggle, a rope was tied around him to pull him and give the right sensation. Thank goodness for the CGI used to erase the rope from the image afterwards. Of course, the Horcrux itself was edited into the shot as well.
What brings you here, Potter? I could ask you the same.
On set filming the battle in the Room of Requirement, the actors were surrounded by real flames, climbing practical sets and, on occasion, sporting safety harnesses to pull off all the magic. Behind the scenes, we don't see the fire snake whipping through the piles of furniture either, but the performers definitely make us believe it's there. While a large space was built to film the scene, much of the Room of Requirement is actually completely CGI, from the pillars to the floors.
The Hungarian Horntail.
Facing off with the Hungarian Horntail was no small feat, and Radcliffe brought it with his performance in the first task of the Triwizard Tournament. The CGI dragon's movements were based on that of a hawk. This and the animation of the creature were digitally rendered and added to the final image. Luckily on set there were no real Dementors, but it did mean Daniel Radcliffe had to be hooked up to a rig that could maneuver and lift him while the actor pretended to be choked. When editing time came around, the intricate work began and the digitally rendered Dementors took their place.
Harry talks in his sleep.
One last visit to the Chamber of Secrets to destroy a Horcrux, but for this very wet scene, a strategically set up green screen acted as the base for when Ron and Hermione used the power of a basilisk fang. A combination of CGI waves bursting up around them and the real wave of water soaking the actors made for an epic scene. We saw Maggie Smith come to life as she exerted the most graceful power, facing off with and making a fool of Snape in the midst of the war at Hogwarts. CGI was responsible for the effects of the spells, but Smith was responsible for the fierce power.
Harry, you do realize what tree this is?
Hermione and Harry versus the Whomping Willow wouldn't have been possible without the added special effects that brought the tree to life and made it a force to be reckoned with. When the scene got a bit more intense, Watson wound up swinging around on a prop branch, while Radcliffe tried to avoid being hit by what would eventually be the tree's trunk. The actual set the burning of Hagrid's home was filmed on wasn't too different from what we see in the final film. Aside from some effects to augment the dark and gloomy scene, the fact that there's an actual explosion taking place on set adds a major wow factor to this heartbreaking scene as Bellatrix celebrates all the havoc she's caused.
Fred, I've been thinking exactly the same thing.
Fred and George really stick it to Umbridge with a literally explosive exit from Hogwarts, wreaking complete havoc throughout the dining hall. The twins filmed their flying separately on a broom in a green screen setting, enabling the editors to add their images to the chaos of the dining hall. We know by now it's not just people or animals that can be dangerous. Plants can be fierce in the world of Harry Potter, and the maze didn't go easy on Cedric Diggory. Instead of vines wrapped around him, Robert Pattinson was tied up in a rope and pulled to mimic the way the ferocious plant drags and traps him.
For a moment there, I thought you were gonna let it get me.
For a moment, so did I.
While the CGI in the movies is fantastic, behind the scenes does look just as impressive sometimes, because of how much was built for the actors to film on and how many real effects, like raging fire, were actually carried out. Which battle do you think looked most interesting without the added effects?